This week on The Right Key, my guest is none other than legendary drummer Steve Gadd. This series was conducted in the spring of 2020 via Instagram, and the audio and video quality do reflect that format. However, the words and insights of these guests are still priceless. Steve Gadd is one of the most recorded, recognizable, and influential drummers of all time. His vast career includes over 1,500 recording credits, and his recording and touring associations include work with Al Jarreau, Paul Simon, the Bee Gees, Carly Simon, Chick Corea, David Sanborn, Eric Clapton, Frank Sinatra, George Benson, James Taylor, Janis Ian, Michael McDonald, Mike Minieri, Paul McCartney, Quincy Jones, Richard T., Ricky Lee Jones, Roberta Flack, Steely Dan, and others. In addition, he created 9 albums with co-led band Stuff and 17 albums as a leader or co-leader. Did you sleep during those years?
It was pretty. I've been running for a while. I've been running until this thing happened, and I finally slowed down.
Yeah, I read a lot about your beginnings and how you came up, and of course, there's that really beautiful, charming video of you playing drums and tap dancing on the Mickey Mouse Club. Right. And I was thinking about tap dancing. A bunch of great drummers were tap dancers. Did you ever at some point think, well, maybe I'll be an entertainer?
No, I never thought about being an entertainer. I always my dream was to be able to play drums for a living. But when I was younger, and my brother was 2 years younger than I, we used to, take tap dancing lessons and perform for veterans and people and assisted living and stuff like that. And I loved tap dancing. I really did. But I never really felt that I was as good as the guys Sammy Davis and Gregory Hines. Those guys were fantastic, and I wasn't into it that heavy, but I love tap dancing, and I just never thought about doing that for a living. I always thought about playing drums for a living.
Did you come back to tap dancing at all? I mean, once you had moved to New York, and did you ever find any time to do it, or was it just too busy and you'd given it up?
I did it. I did it on a concert with Nexus in Tokyo.
Wow.
They were playing a lot of ragtime things on xylophones, and there was a stop time part, and I got from behind the drums and came out and tap danced for about a chorus. And I overdubbed something on for Brooks Arthur. He was recording a Broadway show that had some tap dancing in it, and he wanted some things reinforced. So I had to buy a pair of shoes, and I did it. That's probably the last time I did it.
Well,
I love it. You gotta stay, you gotta stay on top of that.
Yeah, it's very special, and I see that as an influence of why you became the drummer that you are, but also I know that you were very involved with and fond of drum corps, and I think about drummers who came through that same discipline. Elvin Jones was in the Army Band, right? And I think Billy Cobham was in the Army Band. Elvin Jones was in the drum line, Army Marching Band.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think about those drummers and their mastery of especially hand independence and snare drum. And do you feel like that was a big influence for you and growing with that?
Yeah, it was a big influence for me. And actually, excuse me, I've been practicing, when you play a lot of gigs on a set of drums, a lot of it is backbeat stuff. And I got into with a match grip. And drum corps was when I was young, it was all traditional grip. So, I sort of, I've always played traditional grip, but I was doing more match grip. And now with the time off, I've been just practicing rudiments, and and it's been fun. I've been, coming up with different warm-up exercises, and I feel like the way I did when I was in drum corps, because the guys that I was in corps with were also my friends, and we'd spend a lot of time practicing the rudiments and working on drum parts, and I have that kind of excitement towards it again. I just don't have the people to be able to share it with. I mean, drum corps is fun because you can write these parts, and then you got your friends that are playing that want to learn it, and then you show them, and then you play it together, and then try to play it exactly the same. I love that. I think that's one of the things I liked about tap dancing too, was the fact that I did it with my brother. So there was a lot of trying to, sound the same. There's a lot of trying to do the same thing at the same time. And I think that sort of carries over, for me on the bandstand, where even though people are playing different instruments, it's all about trying to come to an agreement so that we're all doing the same thing at the same time, or all trying to do the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because drum corps teaches you to be exact, but you're also a master of playing flexibly with people in the studio, and you played with so many different, especially bass players and rhythm sections, where you can sit in with a rhythm section. And I wanted to ask some about that, about playing with different players and either playing with the click or without the click, and your concept about, especially those early sessions. Some of those sessions must have been without click and adjusting.
Yeah, most of them were a lot of the early sessions were without click. It was, but the click was good though. When the click came, it took the mystery out of, where it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? So I like the click. It's about for me, it's about going into the studio with an open mind, and eventually allowing the music to play us. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if you go in there with preconceived ideas and thinking about you're going to do this and you're going to do that, you're thinking about that more than you're listening to the people you're playing with. And in order to really get into the music, you've got to, listen to the people you're playing with and let the music dictate what's going on. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and you do it very well. And I wanted to ask about that. I mean, I have all these notes that I was prepared to ask you, but I think you're guiding better. And I want to ask about the differences between being part of a band, or what feels like you were part of a band, especially when I think about Chick Corea and those recordings, and the way those recordings feel, and the result of some of those recordings. They really feel like you guys were a band. Like, well,
that's because of the way Chick writes. Do you know what I mean? He wrote all. It wasn't. We didn't go in and try different ideas. He had music prepared, and so that was your guide. So he had the music that he wanted, written down. So that was a big step. You know what I mean? That was like, you had a lot of the questions, were answered because you had a form to follow. And Chick is such a great musician and a great writer that what was written down was worked with what everyone was playing. So it was those sessions were special. But I mean, because of how organized he was in the studio, it sounded like a band. You know what I mean? But there's a difference between being in a band and playing with the same guys all the time. And they're both, either way, it's great. You know what I mean? It's just, but I mean, to be able to do it, you know, to go in and do it in the studio and make it feel like a finished thing. The composer has to have the stuff together. You know what I mean? He has to have he knows what he wants, and he's very clear about, you know, the people he hires to help him get it. You know what I mean? But there is a difference.
Sure, sure. And I guess I'm thinking about the evolution of that band, or the evolution of Stuff, when you
Well,
guys.
Stuff is a band that really was a band before we recorded. Do you know what I mean? Chick's thing was he wrote out some compositions, and we hired musicians, and we went in and didn't even rehearse before. We just went in and recorded it. You know, rehearsed it in the studio and did it live. Stuff was a band that it started out just as guys hanging out at McKell's playing, guys that did a lot of dates back in the 70s, like Gordon Edwards was a bass player, Richard T. keyboard, Cornell Dupree was a guitar player, and Eric Gale, the other guitar player, and Chris Parker was the other drummer in the band. But I mean, that band was working, you know, at McKell's 5 or 6 nights a week, and was doing it for a long time before Warner Brothers ever approached the band to do something. So that was a band, and that we were playing, even though we weren't making a lot of money playing McKell's. It was just, you know, like $100 a night. But it was fun because, you know, we had been in the studio all day working, and it was a chance to relax and play with people that you really enjoyed playing with. And that band just stayed together as long as it did because we just loved playing together. It was so much fun.
When I look at those dates, all those dates in the 70s, and you were so busy, you made so many recordings in the 70s, and you were in the studio. I talked to Dave Spinoza about this, who, of course, said to say hi to you. But he talked about how he loved being just busy all the time. And I never really thought to ask the question, did it feel like you were crazy busy? Because in hindsight, it feels like an insane schedule.
It was busy, but you know, in the 70s, it was a big party for a lot of for people in the industry. You know what I mean? It was like, I mean, I was doing drugs to stay awake because these great gigs were coming in. I didn't want to miss anything. You know what I mean? It was like I was getting called to play with people that I grew up listening to. So everything was just exciting and new and a learning situation musically. You know what I mean? So to be able to be a part of that was fantastic. And then also to be able to, you know, want to play with guys at the end of the day just because you like playing with them. That was pretty amazing. They were good times, you know. Crazy times, but you know, we had a lot of fun before we realized that we were killing ourselves, you know.
Well, fortunately you survived it, and you're still going strong.
Right.
Yeah, and you've been such a part of the evolution of recording in the process through the years. And when I think about, you know, people that we knew before, like Phil Ramone, and I think about the way that producers kind of evolved, and you were involved in some sessions that felt like they had the old model of producer, like this 1974 record you did with Aretha Franklin, where Jerry Wexler was producing. He probably wasn't doing the same kind of role that Phil Ramone would do on a later record. Would you say that's right? Or?
Well, I mean, I only worked with Jerry Wexler on a Maggie Bell album. I worked a lot with Aretha, and I worked a real lot with Phil. So, you know, Phil did a lot of pre-production with the artists, and I knew that from working with him. You know, Jerry Wexler I don't know if he had done as much pre-production, but he hired like Ralph McDonald and Bill Eaton and Bill Salter's Antesia Music. They were sort of they did the arrangements. So Jerry had those guys to go to. He was talking to Bill Eaton and giving instructions that way. But you know, like, yeah, there were producers that really had, you know, a lot of input, and would direct how they wanted the arrangements to go, what changes they made, and you know, so it was there was less. It wasn't, you know, you didn't really have, you didn't have to take the time to come up with a part. You just had to really, you know, you had to learn the arrangements, and and that's how the things would change. With Phil, you know, like, especially with Paul Simon, I mean, you know, sometimes Paul and I would work just on the drum part before anyone else came in, or he'd work on a keyboard part before the other musicians came in. So just everything was a little different, but you know, you had to find a way to fit in with all the different ways that people wanted to work. So they were all learning experience for me, musically, and working and learning how to work with producers and different engineers.
Yeah, when I think about that, you know, 74, and you would play on those records, and 75, I guess 74 was also still crazy with Paul, and then but also those great early CTI records, like George Benson, Bad Benson.
Yeah, you know, back in those days, this was before they were blocking out, you know, multiple days for work. They were still booking things 10 to 1 and 2 to 5 and 7 to 10, you know. So, you know, I did a lot of work for Creed Taylor, and you know, it was in Jersey across the George Washington Bridge at Rudy Van Gelder's studio. And but I mean, it wasn't like they blocked out the day all night. I mean, so you'd be done at 5:30, and you could, you know, book something at night in New York if you wanted. Later on, people like Paul Simon would block out, you know, just book like 4 or 5 days, and so you didn't have to, even though you might not be working every minute of every day, he had the time, so you weren't running back and forth, and he had your complete attention. So that's how, and that was when it really went from the, you know, the 10 to 1, 2 to 5, 7 to 10 to more just open things where they'd book a block of time, you know.
Yeah, well, I thought it was just interesting, all the different projects that you were involved in, and having to shift your head. Like maybe the morning session you'd be doing a pop record, in the afternoon session doing a jazz record or a jingle or something. Spinoza talked about running off to write jingles after a morning session.
Yeah, David was really, when I got to New York, Spinoza was playing on all the sessions, producing. He was, you know, amazing. So, what did you just ask me?
I was asking about the idea about shifting gears in your head between.
Oh yeah, well, you know what? The shifting gears was like the music shifted it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's like, and I loved a lot of different kinds of music. So, you know, I was hungry for different things. I had 5 years of college. I was in the Army for 3 years, sight reading every day. So, you know, I had my reading together, and I was ready. You know, I was and things were coming in, and all of my training had paid off. Do you know what I mean? It was, you know, I was hungry to take different kinds of gigs.
Yeah, yeah, and thinking about all these different albums, of course, I have to ask just briefly about Asia and the process of going in to work on that record, and if it felt immediately natural, if there was a lot of request about changing things, because, you know, over these records, you've created drum parts that have become iconic drum parts. And
Right. Go ahead.
Was it always a situation where they allowed you the license to do what you wanted, or were they more?
No, they didn't. You know, they had something that they wanted for Asia, and they, I guess they had been trying it with different drummers with the same band, and they got good takes, but I guess it wasn't exactly what they wanted, and that one, and went from like a pretty, you know, recording studio approach to the beginning of the song to a different kind of approach at the end. You know what I mean? And um, I think that it was just difficult for them to communicate how they wanted that to evolve. You know, and I just you know, they wanted the end to be busy and crazy, so I just I did what I thought they wanted, and it was crazy and busier than I thought anyone would ever want it for pop records. You know what I mean? But it turns out they wanted it, and we got it pretty quick. There were other tracks I did with them at other days. The Asia was done in L.A. I've done other things with Steely Dan in New York, and they were, you know, we were just working on a backbeat on a snare drum over and over. So they had different ways of recording different pieces of music with different musicians, and it's sure whatever they did paid off, because they've made some great albums.
Yeah, of course, of course. And then you worked on some West Coast stuff with Jay Graydon and those Al Jarreau records. Really great tracks.
That's when, and David Foster was in the rhythm section. That's when I first met David. He was still doing dates. Yeah, it was fun, man. Abe Laboriel was on playing bass, and you know, it was fantastic. And I kept on meeting all these new great musicians that, you know, I mean, L.A. and New York were just loaded with great players. And in the studios and the recording industry, you know, if you were lucky enough to get called, gave you the opportunity to meet, you know, these people. And also, like, back in those days, they had rehearsal bands, so that was another way where you'd do a rehearsal band so a guy could hear his arrangements, and you know, you do it for nothing, but it gave you an opportunity to meet other players and get your name around, you know.
Wow, and did you find that the West Coast sessions were a different pace than the New York sessions? I forgot.
Yeah, I mean, the New York sessions were, you know, you were right in the middle of the city, so there was, you know, there could be a bar across the street or a coffee place 2 doors down. I mean, you could get out of the studio. In L.A., everyone, it was so spread out that when you got there, you were in the studio, and unless you were going to drive somewhere else, you couldn't go anywhere. So they seemed a little bit more relaxed, in that when you weren't playing, you know, you didn't have the opportunity to go running around by foot to a coffee place or to a restaurant. You know what I mean? It's like like you could in New York. You were in the place, and they had everything you needed there.
Yeah.
It was sort of relaxed that way, you know.
Can you talk about and you had been playing all these sessions, and then you played in the SNL Band. I don't know how you had time to do that, because that takes its own time as well. In the late '70s, right? Saturday Night Live Band.
Yeah, I mean, I got called to do that gig, and I had already accepted this at the same time. The first year that Saturday Night Live came on, there was another show on opposite it called The Howard Cosell Show, and I had accepted that gig, you know. And in those days, when you give your, yeah, well, that's the way it is. You take a gig and you do it. You know what I mean? Other than this Saturday Night Live thing came up, and I had already had something, so you know, I couldn't do it, you know, full time. I was able to sub on the show, you know, a few times after that, and it was great. I loved it. It was a great band. It was everything we did back in those days was a lot of fun. You'd see people that you'd seen on other sessions. It was like, you know, you were always around people. You know, you'd be meeting new people, but there were always some familiar faces that were always there. You know, and it was just a great time. It was a great period for music and playing and recording.
And you, but by 1982, you were ready to make your own first album.
Oh, the Gadabout.
Yeah, and had you been thinking about that for a long time?
Maybe no. I never, you know, people. I had friends that were, you know, encouraged me to do that, and I never really. Back then, I didn't think about doing it as much as other people thought it would be a good idea, and we collaborated and you know I went along with it. But I mean, I didn't, you know, I didn't know how to be a leader. You know, I mean, I was really a sideman. You know, I mean, that's really what I am, a sideman. And for me, being a leader today is where I make more musical decisions. But when I'm on the bandstand, I don't feel like a leader. I feel like I'm part of the band. The only thing, I mean, I'm a leader because I have to announce and stuff. But when we're playing, it's still. I still go for the same thing that I go for on any session, was try to let's come to an agreement and make it feel the best that it can feel. So, and it feels good for us, and we can transmit that to the audience, and they can feel the same way at the same time.
Well, I think that's why you have such a great spirit, and you're still enthusiastic about music. It's the understanding of goodwill between musicians and agreeing about music.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, I'm since '87 I moved down to New York, and a lot of my work's been traveling. All of my work's been traveling somewhere. Even if I had to go to New York, I was living in Rochester, New York. Now I'm in Arizona. So there's a lot of hard work just to try and get to the gig. You know,
Right.
I mean, traveling is a nightmare now with, you know, well, I mean, now it's not even existent, but before that, right before this thing happened, it was crazy, man. You had to get to the airport 3 hours ahead of time, and even that wasn't enough sometimes. So with all of that, you know, energy put into just getting to the gig, if we got there and we weren't able to hear and really feel like we were able to make music, I mean, it wouldn't have been worth it. But the fact that we got there and we were able to hear each other and make it happen and have fun musically, that kind of shared energy with the musicians and with the audience adds years to your life. You don't need as much sleep. You know, your life is easier because you've gotten to a place and shared something good with some people that you cared about, and that's the magic of life. You know what I mean? When you can share those feelings and that excitement with people, and get beyond all the bullshit and get beyond the ego. It's just about making it feel the best that it can feel, and it makes people just want to, you know, stand up and dance, and it doesn't make any difference with who. Just it gets you to that point, and that's what makes, you know, being on the road possible, because it would be much too hard if you couldn't get to the place and make it happen musically. It wouldn't make any sense, you know. So when the music is happening, it just it adds years. It feels like it adds years in my life.
That's absolutely right. And I feel that joy, especially going back to stuff. And of course, as a keyboard player, I have a big place in my heart for Richard T. and the way that you guys played together. It was,
I mean, that band, I just wanted to play with those guys. I wouldn't, you know, they didn't have to pay me. I just wanted, you know, those were the guys, those were the studio guys back at the time. And those were the guys that no matter what they played, how simple or how hard it was, the simplest thing, they did it all their might. Gordon Edwards was a very, a simple bass player, but man, it was honest, and every note he meant it. And they wanted everyone on the bandstand to mean it that much. They all meant it. No matter how simple it was, they meant it all their might, and they tried to make it groove all their might, and it worked, and it was contagious. It made me want to play with them. It made it made Chris want. It made the people want to come and hear the band and just hang out.
Yeah, it's really joyous music.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Cocker ended up going to McKells and sitting in with the band, and that was when Chris, one night that Chris was there, I wasn't there. But after that, there was a lot of, there was a lot of talk about that club because, a celebrity had been there, and then record companies got involved, and the rest is history. But, at the beginning, it was just out of love. It had nothing to do with anything other than wanting to play with the people you were up there to play with.
Yeah, and I feel like you had a similar, a very stylistically different, but a similar collaboration with Eric Clapton when you played with him.
Well, I love Eric. I mean, he and I have a lot of, we're both the same age. We're both in recovery. We have a lot of things in common, a similar kind of sense of humor. But the thing, when Eric plays, it's like he's not holding back. He's going for it. You know what I mean? And that's that to play with someone like that and be able to do your best and give it all you got and have it be appreciated is great. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Really, I don't feel like I had as much of a collaboration with Eric as I did with Stuff, because Eric puts projects together. Stuff was a thing we were doing all the time. Eric's thing is he'll put a thing together and tour for a year, and then take some time, maybe start another project and do another tour. And sometimes it's with different members of the band, Sometimes it isn't even with me. He tries different players. But the thing, whenever I play with him, it's a joy. And it's a great experience, I look forward to it.
And you were talking about the simple playing and stuff and meaning every note. And I've always observed with your playing the beauty of the simplicity sometimes. And of course, you've flexed on some famous recordings, and it's been very tasteful even at that, where the recordings are notey. But I noted something also about your playing, and maybe it harkens to an older style of playing, but oftentimes you play quite quietly, and I think it's beautiful, and it brings a beautiful tone from the drums that you don't hear with drummers that are playing. Because the modern style, a lot of modern drummers like to play all rim shots. And I had this discussion with a few drummers that I respect about center stroke and quieter drums and bringing the tone out of the drums. Was that always something for you? And I know you're not always doing it. I'm not assuming that you're always doing that. But is that...
Well, that's the way I learned. You know what I mean? When I went to... even when I was in drum corps, I even had another teacher outside of the corps, that I studied with and have been still my teacher. So, so I had good training on just technique and trying to get a sound on the drum. And I started doing it when I was young, and it just became a habit. Sometimes, I've learned that sometimes you have the opportunity to really hit hard, and it's great when a drummer can really do that, because drums are the kind of instrument where a lot of times you want to, in smaller areas, you got to back up a little bit. but when you can finally get a chance to hit it and play, it feels great. But that's not something I don't want to be playing at 10 all night. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's good to get there, and it's good to be able to get there, make it like an effect musically, and then come back, so it doesn't get boring just being loud.
Yeah, well, I think you have something very unique and special that I don't see as often with the dynamic range that you play, and the tones that you create, and of course the recordings in the '70s. I wanted to ask another thing about tones because when I was listening to a bunch of early '70s recordings, I had a discussion with a drummer about the style of deadening drums, and somebody suspected that you were one of the first people in the studio to be doing that.
Well, I was doing it. I mean, I learned that from other guys that I met that were in the studio when I arrived in New York. I mean, like Ronnie Zito, Bill Livornia, Grady Tate, Bernard Purdy was already in the studio. There were I can't remember. Alan Schwartzberg. And in those days, most of the studios had a bass drum and two toms, and drummers would bring a trap case with snare drum, bass drum pedal, hi-hat pedal, a couple of cymbal stands, and a snare drum. And I remember some of the heads on the toms that were in the studio had dents in them. And, so we would take, at the time I smoked cigarettes, and we used to take a cigarette and put the lit end, lay it down flat with the lit end over the dent and roll it back and forth. And the heat from the end of the cigarette would pull the dent out of the drum. So, you know what I mean? So we could get a little bit more life out of it because, I mean, they weren't changing heads, and everybody, they were doing jingles and records on these drums. So you had to try and come up with ways to give them back some life. But there was the engineers then wanted separation. They didn't want the tom ringing when you hit the snare drum. You know what I mean? So it was all this deadening thing, and it really wasn't the sound that I was just trying. My goal in the studio was to be there for everybody, to make it, try to work with the engineer to get a good sound, not try to tell him this is what it is, make it happen. We got to work together. You know what I mean? It's like I'm trying to make it. I want you to be happy, and that'll make me happy. As long as we're and you go right down the line with all the players and the producer. You're trying to have a rapport and communication about making this project the best that it can be musically for the artist and the producer. And so you had to get people working together. It wasn't like the engineer was responsible for, I mean, it was like he and I were responsible for the drums, not just me and not just him, me and him together. And we would work out the problems. If I had to deaden something, I would. That was more important than what sound that I thought I needed. Making people comfortable and everyone, feeling good in the same area was important.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's why you formed so many long relationships with guys like Al Di Meola and David Sanborn, and you did record after record with guys like that. And can you talk about any of those experiences with playing with the same guys and coming back and you do an Al Di Meola record and then go forward in time and do another one and things would change, or David Sanborn and all those I know that he was around the scene, but you played on some of those incredible tracks, you know.
Well, David started out doing, he was doing sideman stuff. That's how
Yeah.
we met. And then, after he and I doing sessions together, knowing each other, he started doing his own thing and called me to do, to play on the albums. And he had a producer there that he wanted, and it would end up for different albums, different producers. But it was just about trying to understand what he wanted and what his producer wanted, and then rolling up our sleeves and allowing it to happen. You know what I mean? And then, and once you really learned what you had to do, then it was about just trying to get a performance. But yeah, it was just, I love what I was doing. I love the fact I really appreciated the call, and I loved doing music for a living, and I wanted to get called again. That you want people to, it's like a mom and pop business. You want people to want to use you again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's about please and thank you. You know what I mean? It's about, it's just about, and when you're there, just being there and trying to do what they want for the amount of time that they hired you, and not looking at messages, not listening to your cell phone, just be there and do that. And with those people, David Sanborn, I love this guy. He called me to play in his album. That was amazing to me. I was thrilled.
Yeah.
And I wanted it, and the thrill wasn't the thrill. Now that I think about it, was the fact that the music, I was going to be able to play some music with some guys my own age that was really, something, and yeah, I got to New York, and it was like being a kid in a candy store with all of these players, all of them, and the guys that I learned something from everybody, you know what I mean? It was a whole, being in the studio, seeing how engineers work, producers, artists, everybody did a little different way. And I was just, I was hungry for all of it. I was gobbling it up.
Now that we're here in the 21st century, and obviously the music business is not what it was, and there are a lot of distractions to music, and recording has changed so much. Do you find it's harder to record, more challenging to record than before? Do you feel like, in what ways has it changed positively or negatively? And because you're still pretty busy and you've done a lot of recording, even in the first half of the through the 2010s, for sure, a lot.
Yeah, not as much though, but it's there's a lot more recording with just people, one person in the studio, playing to a track. I like it all. I think that if you're in this business, you got to be careful about putting the blinders on and thinking that this is the only way, because it isn't the only way. You know what I mean? And there's other guys that are come up with other ways, and if you have the opportunity to be with them and you can learn something, then it's good. You know what I mean? So it's different, but it's not bad. It's certainly, you don't have to do, if you make a mistake, you don't have to do a whole take again. You can go in and fix it. And everybody that hires you has their own way of working. Now, when I go do an album with my band, it's like going back to the old days.
Yeah.
Where we're all hanging, we're all there, listening to the playbacks, and then guys go out and fix what they want to fix while everyone else is waiting. And it's a hang. I like that. You know what I mean? Because I like being around. I like being in the studio and hanging with the guys and stuff.
Somebody could say somebody might assert that it's harder to make records that feel like this in this compartmentalized way.
Well, yeah, I just think it's because to try and get, if you got 5 guys together trying to get them to agree on something at the same time, that's one thing. But if you start out with this, and then you try to get one guy to, lock in with this, and then another guy to lock in with this and that, it's not happening at the same time. So who's ever producing has got his work cut out for him. He's got a lot of work to do after every one of those overdubs, putting things together and seeing how they line up. A lot more decisions to make,
Yeah.
When you do it live, and you're looking at the grid, there might be some things that don't line up, but that you're willing to let it go because the magic is there. And the real big things that don't line up, you can sort of fix them. Or the guy, if a player doesn't like what he did, he can go in and fix his part. But when you're doing it live, it's you can hear the end result. When you're doing it step by step, you got to wait. The producer that's putting it together has got a long wait before he can even start to think about putting it together. So it's just another process. The live thing is like you allow everybody to make some decisions and fix their things at the same time. The other one is just sort of it's a different way to do it, and they're both good, but they're just different.
Yeah. Well, man, I want to thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom and positivity with us today, and I'm so happy that you're still out there going after it and that you're enthusiastic about music.
I am. I love it, man. I love it. Like the last time I played was in New York on March 12th, was this Love Rocks benefit.
Yeah, with Will Lee, who's watching right now.
Will Lee, a lot of great players, man. Yeah. And then after the next day, I was supposed to go to Japan, and everything after that for the whole year was canceled. So, so here we are. It's great to, it's great to, now I'm trying to, do a little bit more modern technology, hanging out with you guys. I'm not really good at it, but I'm doing it. So now I'm learning some other stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's super positive, and I want to thank you so much. It's great. It's great for us to get to hear you talk and to get to reminisce a bit about music and all that stuff. So
well, thanks, Henry. It was a pleasure to talk to you too. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Right Key. If you enjoyed the episode, there's a lot more coming. Please click the subscribe and like buttons below. If you want to know more about me or our guests, you can find lots of information in the link just below the video. See you next time.